We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Beis Amud Aleph in Meseches Gittin. This is Gittin Daf 52a. The Mishnah says, Yisomin shesamchu etzel balabayis, if the orphans are relying on a balabayis, or shemino lehen avihen apotropos, or let's say their father appointed for them a caretaker, chayiv la'aser peiroseim. He is chayiv to take off meiser on their produce. Apotropos shemineo avi yisomim yishava. If you have an apotropos that's appointed by the father of the orphans, then he does have to take an oath. Minuhu bezdin lo yishava. But if he's appointed by the court, he does not take an oath. Abba Shaul Omer, Abba Shaul says chiluf hadvarim. It's exactly the opposite. And Rashi says, Shesam chuetzel balabayis lasos alpiv, meaning they're doing what the balabayis says. Velo nismana lehen apotropos. Now, the first case in the mission is there was no apotropos. He wasn't appointed as an apotropos to take care of them. Lo ma'avin velo mi bezdin. He wasn't appointed by their father or by the bezdin. Afilu hachik apotropos. The chiddush of the first line of the mission is, nevertheless, if they are relying on him and he's the one that's taking care of their property, he has the status of an apotropos. Then it said Yishava, he takes a shvua k'sheyigdalu hayisomin. What this means is when the yisomin get older, Yishava lehen she'in lo biyado klum mishal lehen. He has to swear to them that he doesn't have any of their property. Lo Yishava, then it said by the case where he's appointed by the court, he doesn't swear. Taimadach pluksam efarish beGemara. The reason behind this argument is explained in the Gemara. Uvein lamar, v'neitikon olam, who both agree that the reason behind everything is for the betterment of the world. They just again disagree which one takes the shvua and which one does not. And the Gemara says, Uriminu, we have the following contradiction, Atem velo shutfin, it says you, this is a pasuk by Truma, you take off Truma, not by partners, Atem velo arisin, you and not sharecroppers, Atem velo apitropin, you and not caretakers. That's already the contradiction over here, because the Mishnah says, Chayiv la'aser peiroseim. The apotropos is chayiv to take off meiser, and here it says, you and not apotropos. V'lo haTorah mes she'eno shalo. And it says, in general, you can't take off truma on something, on property that's not his. And to that, the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Chisda says, Lokash, it's not difficult, kan lahachil, kan lahaniach. In one case, we're talking about a situation where you're taking off meiser, lahachil, in order to feed the orphans. In the other case, you're just taking off meiser, but you're just leaving the food, the produce. You're not actually using it to sustain the orphans. Rashi says, "Velo shutfin" means ein yachol litrum al chele chaver shalom idaito. One partner can't take off truma on the portion of his friend without his knowledge. Velo arisin, and not sharecroppers al chelko shel balabayis. A sharecropper can't take off truma on the chelek, on the portion of the balabayis. Atem velo haTorah mes she'eno shalo. You again, and not someone who's taking off truma on something that's not his. Hach seifa taima dereisha. This last line is explaining everything in the beginning. Kolomar atem mimayit hatorim she'eno shalo v'hani kulu she'eno shalo ninu. The word atem says you can't take off on something that's not yours, and in all these cases she'eno shalo ninu. This is a case where it's not his. Inami, or you could say zu ve'ein sarach lomar zu katan. It could be that each case, not only here, and we don't, this case rather, and I don't even need to tell you in this case. This case is even worse. Meaning a shutuf is not able to do it. I don't even need to tell you someone who's taking it off on property that's completely not his. In any case, the Rashi continues, and the Gemara said that the answer to the contradiction is, in one case it's lahachil, yisomim la'alter. If the purpose of taking off the meiser is so that the yisomim can eat right now, chayavim laser, then already it's they're chayav, they're obligated, the apotropos is obligated to take off meiser. But if it's lahaniach hatvua ba'otzer at sheyigdalu, but if it's just to leave it there till they get older, lama isuri, what's the point that they take off meiser? Like a sheyigdalu yasrum heim, when the orphans get older, they'll take off the meiser on their own. And the Gemara continues, Vatanya of a brisa that supports this distinction. Hapetropin, tormin, uma'asrin. The apotropin, they take off truma and meiser. Lahachil, if they're doing it to feed the orphans, velo lahaniach. But not if they're just leaving it, not if they're just going to be storing it. And that's exactly the answer that we just gave. And the brisa continues, umochin lahen behema, avodim, ushvachos, batim, sadus, uchramim. They can sell on their behalf. Again, meaning they need to sell for the purpose of the orphans, animals or slaves or maidservants, houses, fields, vineyards, lahachil. Again, if it's in order to feed the orphans, avalol lahaniach, but not just to leave it. Rashi says here, lahachil hamos, if they're going to be using the money on the orphans. Avalol lahaniach shema yignu, you can't just leave the money around, maybe it'll get stolen. Inami mishum shevach beisavi and noiv kavarulam. Or the reason why it's not lahaniach is because this property it's essentially coming from their father's estate. It's something that they want to retain. They don't want to just sell it off and turn it into money, so that's not allowed. And the caretaker can make for them lulav and arava, sukkah and tzitzis, all mitzvahs, v'chol davar sheyesh lo kitzvah, and also anything that has a set amount that's not going to be unlimited, like suyeh shofar. That last line comes to include shofar. V'lochem lahem sefer Torah, tefillin and mezuzahs, and they can buy for them sefer Torah, tefillin and mezuzahs. And again, v'chol davar sheyesh lo kitzvah, anything that has a set amount, la suyeh megillah, that comes to include megillah. V'yein poskin aleim tzedakah, but they can't take from their property to distribute tzedakah, because tzedakah there is no limit. The aniyim are always coming. Vein podin alein es hashvu, they also can't use their money to redeem captives. V'lo kol davar shein lo kitzvah, not anything that is unlimited. Leisuye tanchumi avelim, to include, for example, comforting the mourners. That's also something that has no real limit. Vein apitrapin rashayin ladun lacho v'liskos b'nichsei yisomim, and the apitrapin are also not allowed to go to court and end up causing that the yisomim are chayiv to pay obligations, or even if it's to win in court with the property of the yisomim. And the Gemara asks, Lizkos amaylo, why can't they go to court in order to win, and the yisomim should be able to win the case? And to that the Gemara says, Ela lachov al menas lizkos b'nichsei yisomim. What it really means is they're not allowed to go to court, and then they're trying to win the case, but then in the end, it ends up that the Yisomim lose the case, so the Yisomim there, we don't say that they lose the case. Rashi says as follows, Ladun in Baldin shall Yisomim, again, there's a litigant against the Yisomim, Habola Orer, Al Nechseim, Shem Yischayvu Betanoseim, L'kashiyigdalu HaYisomim, you don't Lahem. Can't go to court, because maybe you're going to end up making the Yisomim chayiv. Better to wait till the Yisomim get older, then the Yisomim themselves can go to court. Lizkos Amai Lo, you don't even, then the Gemara said, why can't they do it in order to win a case? Imdanu Vinizdiku, if they do go to court and the Yisomim win, Vinizdiku HaYisomim, Amai Lo Havidin, why isn't that considered justice? Ela Hachikama, rather what it means is as follows, Ein Rashoin Ladun Lachov Al Menas Lizkos, Imdanu Kedei Lizkos, meaning, if they did go to court in order to win, but then in the end they were chayiv in HaYisomim Nifsadin. In such a situation, we don't say that the Yisomim are going to lose out. And the Brisa continues, V'en apitrapin rashoin limchor berachok v'ligol bekarov. Apitrapin is not allowed to sell something that's far away in order to redeem something that's closer, or bera v'ligol b'yafa, something that's bad, and then to redeem something that's better, even though it seems like that's an improvement. But what's the reason for that? My time, and what's the reason? To deal with mishtanfin, because maybe that land will be swept away, will be damaged, it won't be usable, and in the end they'll lose, so therefore the caretakers can't do that, they can't take that chance. V'en apitrapin rashoin limchor sados v'ligach avodim. Apitrapin are not allowed to sell fields in order to buy slaves, but they could sell slaves in order to buy fields. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, Aflo limchor avadim v'likach sados, they can't even sell slaves in order to buy fields. My time, what's the reason? Dilma lo mishafion. Rashi explains, Dilma lo mishafion lo yum mishukatos etzlo shamiyotza olav irur. Maybe, in other words, when they sell the slaves in order to buy the fields, maybe there's going to be some kind of protest about who really is the owner of the field, and then the Yisomim will end up losing out. Apitrapin are also not allowed to free the slaves. Rashi says, Lotzil Lecheres, to have them go free. Afilu Eina Yisomim Nesadim. This means even if the orphans are not going to lose out by this. Sho'avodim boin liftos atzmam bekesef, meaning let's say the slaves are redeeming themselves with money. How did the slaves get money? Because other people gave them the slave to the money on the condition that it's not the orphan's money. Still not allowed. Because they don't own the guf of the slave, meaning the apitrapis doesn't own the actual slave, that he has the ability to free the slave, and so therefore they're not allowed to do that. However, what they could do is they could sell the slaves to somebody else, and these others can then free the slave. Rashi says, again, that's for the benefit of the Yisomim. Could go on for example, to give them food, or to buy fields, as we said above. Those others can free them. Those others who wanted to give money in order to redeem them, they can buy them, and they'll own them, and then they can free them if they so choose. And the Brisa continues, Rebbe says, Omer Ani, I say, Afu nosein demei atzmo v'yotze. No, he is allowed to pay for himself and go free, meaning the Eved, mimneshu k'mo'ochrolo, because essentially you're selling the Eved to himself, v'tzarech l'chashev imoen v'achron, and then you're going to have to calculate with them at the end. Rashi says, Omer ani kishem shirashayin lemocher lachem, just like the apotropos can sell them to others. Kachem rashayin lekabel hakesef miyado eved asmam toras mechir. You can take the money from the eved himself and as a sale. Mimnei shu apotropos kemocher la'atzmo eved atzmo. It's like the apotropos is selling the eved to himself. But achrona, that means they do a calculation at the end. What does that mean? Kishayigdalu yichashav imoin v'yishava. When he gets older, they'll do the calculation, and he has to swear shelo nishar biyadu klum, that none of the money remains with him again, that everything was done properly, and that he hasn't taken any of the money of the Yisomim. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, Eino tzarech, this is not necessary. Einosin apotropin noshim v'avadim uktanim. You can't have them be women or slaves or katanim, meaning minors. V'minon avi yisomin, but if the father of the yisomim appointed them, harashus biyado, so then there is such permission to do that. And Rashi says, Noshim ein darkon lotzeis v'lavo v'letroach. It's not the way of women to go out to do these business dealings. Avodim ein nemon, and slaves are not believed on this. Katanim ein b'nei das. Katanim don't have das. But again, if they're appointed, Noshim avodim and katanim, that is going to be permissible to appoint them if it was done, even though you're not supposed to do that lechatchila. There was an apotropos in the neighborhood of Rabbi Meir. He was selling the land and using the money to buy slaves. Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Meir did not allow it. So then Rabbi Meir was shown in his dream, I'm trying to destroy, meaning I wanted this to happen. This was all part of God's plan, but you're building. You're not allowing me to destroy, so to speak, the way I want to. But nevertheless, even though Rabbi Meir saw that in the dream, which indicated that he really shouldn't have done what he did, but he said, the things that occur in dreams, they don't change anything. You're not supposed to listen to a dream, and therefore he said he had to continue to do that which he did was correct. And the Gemara continues, Hanu betrayed the Igri Behu Satan. There were two people that the Satan made them fight. The Chol Be Shimshi have a Kaminsu Bahade Adadi. Every Erev Shabbos they would fight with each other. Ikla Rabbi Meir Lahasam. Rabbi Meir went over there, Akavinu Tlasa Be Shimshi Ad Avedlu Shalma. And he held them back for 3 of these Erev Shabboses until they made peace with each other. Shami de Ka'amar Vai de Afke Rabbi Meir Lau Gavrami Beise. And so he heard that the Satan was saying, Rashi says, Shamei l'satan to come arvaida afkemi beise. And Rashi explains, Shamei l'satan, he heard the Satan saying, the comer that the Satan was saying, Vaida afkemi beise. Woe is it that the Satan has been taken out of his house, meaning to say that the Satan lives among this strife, and now there was no longer any strife. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots, Hahu apotropos, the Haveh b'shevivusei Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. There was an apotropos in the neighborhood of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. The Haveh kam ezavin arav ezavin ture, that he was selling land and using the money to buy oxen. V'lo amar le v'lo midi, he didn't say anything to him. Savar lak Rabbi Yossi, and the Gemara explains he held like Rabbi Yossi. The Tanyas we learned in a Bryce. Savar Rabbi Yossi says, Miyamai lo karisi ishti. All of my days I didn't call my wife, u'leshori, and my ox. Elo ishti beisi u'leshori sadai. Rather, I referred to my wife as my house, and I referred to my ox as my field. So essentially, it was an equal exchange to sell the field and to buy an ox. And Rashi says, "L'ishti beisi shekol tzarchei habayis al yad nasav v'yikra habayis." It's the woman who takes care of the house. V'chein shori karo shel sad, and similarly, it's the shore that takes care of the field. And the Gemara continues, Hanu Yasmi to have a smichi gabe ahisavsa. There were these Yisomim, and they were relying on a certain safta, on a certain older woman. Havaluhu torsa, they had an ox. Shakla uzivinta nehilayu, and she took it, she sold it on their behalf. Asu krovim l'kamid Rav Nachman. The relatives came before Rav Nachman. Amrulay, they said to him, Ma'avirta, the Zavna, who appointed her as an apotropos that she's allowed to sell this? Amar Lui said to them, Yisomim shasamchu, etzel balabayas tanan. We learned in our Mishnah that if the Yisomim rely on a particular balabayas, even though that balabayas is not appointed, that balabayas does have the status of an apotropos. But the Gemara says, but they said, how could it be that she can sell this for them, but now it actually went up in value, in the reshus of the lokech, and the reshus of the buyer that she sold it to went up in value. And for halo nikiti demi, and they still haven't taken money in this case. In other words, there was just a mashicha done. The people that she sold it to did a mashicha on the ox, but the money has not yet been received by the Yisomim. And really now we want to go back on the sale because this has went up in value. The ox has went up in value. Amar Lui said to them, Imkain, if that's the case, meaning to say if it went up in value and the all that was done was mashicha, there was no money transferred yet. Hainu de Rav Chaniloi Baridi. That actually is the same teaching as Rav Chaniloi Baridi Amar Shmuel. It's what Rav Chaniloi Baridi said that Shmuel said. Amar Rav Chaniloi Baridi Amar Shmuel, because Rav Chaniloi Loi Baridi said that Shmuel said, Nichsa Yisomim, when it comes to the property of Yisomim, Harei Hein Kehektish, they have a status of Hektish. Velo Mikni Ela Bechaspen, the kinyan is only going to be effective when money is actually transferred, and therefore, in this case, indeed, they can go back on the sale. They can say that it went up in value, and the Mashiach is not going to be considered a kinyan since money was not transferred. That sale was not final. And the Gemara continues, Chamre de Ravno Ukva Yasma Mashchua Bi'arbo Arba. The wine of Ravno Ukva Yasma. Ravno Ukva was a Yasam, he was an orphan. So again, similar situation. They did a kinyan Meshicha for the price of 4, Vayaker Vakam B'shisa Shisa. But then it went up in value, and now it was worth 6. Rashi says, Mashchu lekuchos me'apotropsim, meaning there was an apotropis who was taking care of his property, and the buyers, they did a meshicha from the apotropis, arba achavis, each barrel was worth 4, and then it went up in value, went up to 6. So Asulakami, Rav Nachman, they went before Rav Nachman because they wanted to go now again back on the sale and say it went up in value. We don't want to sell it for 4 anymore. Amar Louis said to them, Hainu de Rav Chaniloi Baridi. That is again the same teaching of Rav Chaniloi Baridi. Do you Rav Chaniloi Baridi Amar Shmuel? Because Rav Chaniloi Baridi said that Shmuel said, Nichse Yisomim Harein Kehekdish. When it comes to the property of Yisomim, that has a status of Hekdish. V'lo Mikni Ela Bechaspa. And the kinyan will only be affected through money. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. Meshoch Piri Miyasme. Again, let's say the buyer does a kinyan meshicha on the produce from the Yisomim Ayakar, and then they go up in value. That's essentially the cases that we just had. Hainu de Rav Chaniloi Baridi. That again is the teaching of Rav Chaniloi Baridi. The Yisomim are allowed to say we want to go back on the sale because the meshicha is not the real kinyan. Now, what if it happened in the other direction? What if Zol? What if it actually went down in value, and now the person who's buying it wants to go back on the sale? So that cannot be done. The strength of a simple person can't be more than hekdesh, meaning in this case, it's actually to the benefit of the Yisomim that it be considered a kinyan, and so therefore we say the Yisomim have the strength of hekdesh, but then they have anything that's stronger than that as well. So if outside of hekdesh this would be a regular kinyan, the Yisomim can say, since it's to our benefit, that's considered to be a regular kinyan. Now let's say it's the other direction. Let's say it's the Yisomim that they do the kinyan meshicha, ayakar, and then it goes up in value. Again, we say lo yekoach hedyot chamer mihekdesh. The koach of the hedyot shouldn't be stronger than hekdesh, and therefore again the Yisomim can take the benefit in that case. Zol. Now let's say it goes down in value. In the case where the Yisomim are making the kinyan meshicha, so now the Yisomim want to go back. So savar mina hainu de Rav Chaniloi Baridi. They thought to say that's the teaching again of Rav Chaniloi Baridi. The Yisomim are allowed to go back in that case. Amar le Rav Shisha Breder Ravidi. Rav Shisha Breder Ravidi said, "Harahi l'ditu." That's actually something that is bad for them. The zimnin demitztarchi lepiri v'leka diyoivlu adiyahavi zuzi, because sometimes the Yisomim will actually need produce, and no one's going to want to give it to them until the Yisomim are able to give money. And we want to encourage people to give to the Yisomim on credit that the Yisomim are able to owe the money, and so therefore in that case we actually say it is going to be considered a final kinyan. You have a yasmi zuzi apiri. Now let's say also the Yisomim are purchasing, but they don't do a kinyan meshicha. They give money for the produce, and then zol, then it goes down in value. So lo yehei koach hedyot chamer min hekdesh. So we say the koach of hedyot should not be stronger, more strict than hekdesh. So in this case, since generally speaking, outside of hekdesh, we would say that you have to do a kinyan meshicha. The Yisomim over here also can say that we didn't do a kinyan meshicha. We want to be able to go back on this. Ayakar, now let's say it goes up in value, and so the Yisomim, they want to keep it as a kinyan in this case. So they thought to say that that's the same as Rav Chaniloi Baridi. Again, they gave money, and we should say that that's considered to be a kinyan for the benefit of the Yisomim. Amar Lu Rav Shisha Breder Ravidi. Rav Shisha Breder Ravidi said to them again, Harahi l'ditu. This is also something that's bad. If you're going to allow them to go back in this case, that's going to ultimately be bad for them. We will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis.